chop this up and then I'll start us. Well, good morning, everybody, and we're glad to have you back with us as we have been discussing the vision for a common life. Again, you can learn a little more about these students who are involved. If you want to go back and look at episode 1, they introduce themselves and share a little bit about their major and year and interests. And if you want to see the vision for the common life, the text of it, you can find it online. I'm sure it's fairly easily Googled or found from our website, so you can find the full text there. Today, we're talking about the third main section, which is Houghton being a community at peace, which is, it's a really interesting idea, to be talking about this midway through the semester when everything feels intense. Ordinarily, as you know, we'd be kind of winding down towards October break now, and people would get that little break from each other that often is necessary to maintain feelings of peace with each other. And we don't get that this semester. That's the reality. So it may seem like an interesting time to talk about peace, and hopefully we'll find out, going both ways, we'll find out what ways that Houghton really does embody that peaceable life together, and maybe some ways that we don't, that we can work on. So I'll jump into a few questions, and again, President Mullen, you can chime in as you like. The first one, though, is just related to the image of a life that is ordered in all things and secure. And the idea behind that is for us to, like, for me, security is a very important idea, that we feel secure with God, that we understand that, you've heard me say it 100 times, we're God's beloved children. The more that we understand that we're God's beloved children, the more that we have security we need to really interact with each other as people, instead of just treating other people as either threats or allies to our own ideas. So I'd love to hear what that means, like, lived out. When at Houghton do we feel that kind of security? Like when you are just so safe with God and with others that you could really be yourself. Like, when have you experienced that at Houghton? So, students, any thoughts on that? When have you experienced that feeling? Amy, you want to go first?
Sure. So
okay.
I was talking about this earlier, in the earlier episodes, about my friends and how, like, they make me feel on campus. And I feel like the pinnacle of my peace on campus was last year when I lived in a townhouse with my best friend. And I don't even know how, by some miracle, we ended up staying in this townhouse, just the two of us.
Oh.
And, like, being in kind of our own little bubble and being able to, like, be myself with my best friend, like, just living and going to class and, like, seeing God through her. She's such a godly and, like, the most Christian I've ever met in my life. Like, I love her to death. Like, just being here and being my true and, like, full self around her, being in our house, it was just so amazing. And I just thank God for her, because she is the greatest person. And I think that really, like, just showed me, like, I learned a lot about myself during that time, like, being able to be my true self, because the only other time I've ever like that is at home. But, like, feeling so free, so far away from home, I'm from Maryland, was like kind of an eye-opening experience. And, like, having her make me feel that way brought me closer to her. And that was, like, just a really cool thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Molly, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like in general, for me, I grew up in a high school that was really big, and it was in a rather privileged community of people who weren't very accepting. Like, it wasn't a Christian private school or anything, it was a public school, and I never really felt super comfortable being myself there, because anybody who knows me knows that my personality can be a lot, and I felt like I had to keep it tame, and I couldn't, just really, except for like maybe I only kept 3 or 4 really close friends because I didn't really know who to trust there. So walking onto Houghton's campus, I instantly felt like I was safe enough to be myself, and I have been ever since. And I just think that whenever I'm on campus, I just feel so free that in certain ways, even when I still go at home, I'm way more myself here than I am at home. And it's not like home has anything to do with that. It's just at Houghton, I feel like there's such a big group of people who are also different, but we celebrate in our differences, and we lift up people for what they like and what they're interested in. And I just have always felt like anytime I'm on campus, that's the safest place for me to just embrace who I am in whole. So I know it's not very specific, but it's just anytime I'm here, it's just great.
Thanks, Molly. Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, so I mean, Molly shared her experiences about, being high school, not necessarily feeling she could just be herself. And, that's something that, I'm challenged with myself sometimes. But like kind of going off of what Amy said about how she had that really special friend who went to invest in her and spend time together and all of that, I've felt the most secure and felt that sort of peace on campus when there have been others who really want to pursue a deep, committed friendship where they have a track record of faithfulness to one another, wanting to build that friendship. And so Molly mentioned trust, right? And we've talked about this in a previous episode, how important that is for good dialogue. And so for me, when I do, able to overcome sort of maybe my fears of trusting or whatever, feeling safe around people, it's been when people have that track record of mutual pursuing. So when we're a community where we're pursuing those deep, committed, regular friendships, maybe rather than just hopping from event to event, trying to just be, like a party kind of pop around kind of person, focusing on those deep, intimate relationships. Yeah.
That's good. I don't know, President Mullen, how you reflect on your time as a student. I know for me, I was probably between these three. There was a way that I always felt very at home all around Houghton, but also really treasured, particular friendships. And I always tell people, like, it was hard to choose to come back to Houghton to work because I was a little afraid of, you just sort of ask yourself the question of, am I kind of romanticizing what that period meant in my life? And am I really going back there because I think I have something to contribute, or do I just want to go back to that time period? And mostly I feel very comfortable around campus that I've matured into a leader. The one exception, when I go into Shanawana, I almost always revert back to being 20 years old again. And I can't be fully trusted to not do something goofy, just because the place feels the same, largely looks the same, and the other time like that was when Eli Knapp and I were sitting together in church and kind of joking with each other the whole time, like college students do, instead of listening like fathers of young children should do. Just because some of those friendships really do just you revert back to those times which you do really hold very precious. So anyway, that's how I think about. I appreciate how students talk about Houghton with the HOUGHME home idea. That was not a thing when I was a student. So I appreciate that there's kind of a general feeling, but I think, like Amy and Ryan, I tend to locate it in specific places and relationships too. So any thoughts from you, President Millen, on that kind
The
of
only
security?
thing I'm going to slightly take off in a different track that I think will come into the other questions. I'm very struck by how all of you have talked about the things that have made this place feel secure, and maybe that's because that's a question Michael asked you. But Ryan's last comment was starting to get us off in the other things that we're tempted to run after instead of the kind of centeredness in people and best friends. And Michael, I'm going to say this because you will remember that this was one of the sections of the document that we had the most discussion about, because the students will notice immediately that most of the traditional rule kinds of things are in this section. And part of the issue was, well, how does being at peace make you, not want to, go out and seek peace and all these other kinds of things. I mean, it wasn't obvious to people why all of I'll call them the traditional rule-oriented things were hidden within this notion of we're a community at peace. And I just feel like the comments that you've all made have really set up the next set of questions, because you've all identified that when you're really at ease and at rest with other people in a place that you feel secure, you're not as likely to go out and, you know, want to chase all these other kind of false places of peace that tend to be the things that I'll just say most community expectation documents make rules about. And we're trying to say, no, let's push people toward healthy places where they find peace and don't have to then chase that in all these other ways. So anyway, Michael, I think that's the way you're going to go in some of the other questions. So
Sure. No, but thanks for highlighting it, because you're right. I mean, that's, you know, each of the things we'll talk about have a history at Houghton. Like, I mean, the next question about Sabbath, particularly.
yes,
Sabbath was always a contentious issue at Houghton.
and
I'm
a
sure more
burden.
than when you were a student than when I was a student. But that idea of, like, I'm sure it would be unthinkable to you when you were a Houghton student to see students out playing on Sunday. Like when I go for a run on Sunday and see
Right.
students playing, that was not a common thing. And so,
Yeah, Sabbath was a burden, not a gift. And
right.
and so the part of the document is trying to turn all these things into gifts rather than things that we make rules about. And yeah, anyway, Michael, yeah.
Good.
So you were going to take things off in the other questions.
Yeah, so let's talk about Sabbath. Is that something that really is possible and normal here? Is that still aspirational for us? Is there still kind of a culture of busyness that makes Sabbath really impossible? Students, how do you feel about that question? Are we there? Are we on the way? What do you think?
I can start this one off.
Sure.
Just from my kind of perspective, and then seeing friends and people that I'm around, I really think that we're not there. I mean, we're moving in that direction, I think, but it actually kind of hurts my heart that I totally understand. Like, you know, when I first came to college, my first couple of years were spent like completely ignoring Sabbath practicing, and so I didn't understand exactly how serious I should take it, maybe, or how important of a pattern it was to kind of put into my time here at Houghton, or even just lifetime practice. And so, because when I look around, you know, I do see that busyness. I see a lot of people's, you know, when I practice Sabbath, and some of my closer friends do. But you know, when I look to plan things with people, it's usually, oh no, I've got this work to do, and there's no possible way. There's no possible way I could do this without a Sabbath, which I personally believed myself before I actually was encouraged and held accountable to try and to understand it. So I think when it comes from understanding what the Sabbath is about, maybe how important it is in our, you know, daily patterns and life patterns, I don't think that as a whole, as a community, we understand maybe the significance and what it can do for us as a gift. Because I did not, wow, what a gift it has been. It actually took me a few months of doing it to really understand and receive the gift that it was. So it's a hard thing to get into, but wow.
Yeah,
Oh, you're in there.
like,
Go ahead.
I personally am not there yet, and I grew up in just like the way that my life was, and I have two older siblings, and my brother played like competitive baseball and football and things like that, and then my sister and I were competitive dancers. She did competitive cheerleading, I did field hockey. We were very busy. So Sundays we had things. We never really observed a Sabbath day. We were always going constantly. I had a lot of dance competitions on Sundays. I had where I was cranking out homework between running to the stage and doing all these crazy things. My brother would have games on Sundays, or he would be in the middle of traveling to tournaments. My sister would be finishing up competitions. It was just like, that was never something we could do. So coming to college, to me, it was like, okay, so Sundays, it's still another work day. So thinking of the idea of having a Sabbath is something I've been trying to work towards as I see more of my friends and people in the community doing it. It's like, oh, this is a gift that I really should be doing, like setting aside this time. But for me, it's been over time, because the way that I grew up was, you know, you take every day you have to be able to do things. And I really like to see the treasure in that. And so it's something I'd like to continue working towards. But it's really encouraging and hopeful for me to see other people who do practice it, because then I can get a better of idea of how I can do it, because I'm just coming from an experience where that was never really a thing or a priority. So
Good. Amy.
Well, my experience is almost completely opposite of Molly's. My family, we take Sunday Sabbath very, very seriously. Ever since I was a child, Sunday was church, chapel worship the entire day. Like Sunday was never a time where we do anything. Like we weren't allowed to do our chores on Sunday. Any school functions we weren't allowed to go to. It was very much God centered on Sunday. And that is something that I carried into college. And I told myself that when Sunday comes, that it's church. I'll call into my home services. I still do. I won't even do homework on Sunday. That's something that I like take very seriously, like dedicating one full day to God to like just worship him and thank him for everything that he's done, to present myself to him and like give the Holy Spirit like a chance to work through me, to renew me, restore me, prepare me for the next week. And I find that like really important to me because my parents have shown me the importance of it. And I enjoy that like Houghton is a campus where I'm able to do that, because I know especially in these times, some people say, oh, you know, all the professors are giving us all this extra work because of the pandemic, everything is online. So like professors assume that we have extra time and they're just giving us busy work. But like, I feel like even if the professors are just giving us busy work just to keep us busy, it's still like Sunday is still a time that like I want to dedicate to God.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You can obviously see how hard it is to aspire together when there's such different, you know, such different experiences. And yeah, I'm glad, and I hope, Amy, that Houghton continues to hold a place for you so that that's normal and normative, and that you know, it gives people like Molly a chance to try something and grow into something that's also good and life-giving in some ways. Part of the trick, of course, is, as I alluded to at the beginning, when it's bound up with legalism, it becomes very hard then, you know, even some years later, it becomes hard to recapture an ethic that's not legalistic about it, but it still gives people the freedom to participate as much as they can and want. So, well, thanks for sharing on that. Yeah, as President Mullen pointed out, I mean, there's so many sections here that we could talk about which attempt to do the same thing, where we sort of say, there's something here that we want to do, but we want to do it in a unique way that's not rules heavy. Part of that, the section on racism and division that I'm very happy with in that section. I mean, obviously that's a hard thing to talk about, to know exactly how to precisely express a heart towards. But I am very happy with the idea of sharing each other's joy as part of that. I feel like this is something that Julian Cook really taught me, Julian, who heads up our program on the east side of Buffalo, that so often when we discuss racism, it boils down to problems, instead of groups of people sharing the things that, contributing the things that bring them joy to the wider community so that they can bring all of us joy together. And whether or not it's particularly around the issue of racism, just have there been times on campus where you have felt like we've been able to share joy across some worldly division, a time where you're able to see, oh, this group of people, like for me, and this has nothing to do with race particularly, but one of the chapels I'll always remember joyfully was when our professor, one of our equestrian professors spoke, the woman who founded the program. And all of the equestrian majors sat down in the front of the chapel, and she made all of these horse jokes that only really the equestrian majors understood, but they all laughed uproariously, and we kind of laughed along with them, even though we didn't really understand all the jokes. But it was just like, oh, this is their contribution, and we're thankful for them being here and part of us. So I don't know if you had any stories like that where we've been able to lift up joy across a division. Anything particular to share students on that?
I can start off. Wow, when I thought about this one, I don't know if anyone remember, if people could remember Sheffin. I think his last name was Hestick.
Sure, yeah, Hestick, yep.
Wow, it really left an impact on me when I was able to share in his gift of worship during chapel sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Just the freedom, his own personal style, all of that was very unique that he would able to share with all of us. Wow, that spoke to me. So in that kind of moment of worship together, I mean, I'm just in the audience, but I mean, actually, there was a special moment of me and him sharing joy, because he saw he saw me and how, you know, ecstatic I got sharing with him in worship before God. that we locked eyes and we understood one another and we were sharing that. And so, I mean, there's just an example of how the Lord, our unity in Christ, how worshiping over these amazing truths and promises that we all hold together, brings together those different ways of worship, different ways of this and that, and how I just want to I can't really express it, but I think you're understanding how impactful and how much that experience of doing that can really bring people together.
Yeah, thanks.
I had a similar experience. I'll just share two quick things, but the first thing is very similar to that was, and I'm horrible for not remembering speakers' names, but we had a speaker at some point last year. I think it was in the fall semester. It might have been one of the first ones we had, but in a similar way, he came from at least a denominational or cultural background that was different from what I was used to. And I think right from the gate, he asked us all to be vocal in the crowd. And he had this energy and he was just like shouting out. And I loved that because, like I said, I love participation. So it was so fun for me to get this entire new way of hearing God's word. And I thought about that chapel all the time. And I was like, wow, I wish I could have more of this because I absolutely loved what he did. And he just had this joyful energy that just kept me going through the rest of the day. And I really appreciated that. And that's something I really liked about like the chapel speakers and having the different cultural backgrounds and people of different race and denominations. And it was just so great to share in the joy of how the word of God was being delivered. And then a little more personally, I've gotten the opportunity to make close friends who are from places like I have a close friend from Kenya and then from South Africa. And whenever I'm in groups with them, sometimes they'll make jokes about things I may not understand because it's very cultural to them and where they live. But the way that they laugh and the energy they give off, it makes me so happy. And I was even able to sit down and we all had a conversation about, the division and this country specifically and things like that. And just to hear these different perspectives, it just brought me joy that we were able to do that. And that it was just like opening these conversations, kind of like what we talked about before in the last episode with gentleness and things like that. So I think just getting to experience all these different cultures after where I'm from, it's not very culturally diverse, sadly. So to get to have these experiences here just fills me with such joy because I love seeing people just express themselves and their culture and their upbringings.
Yeah.
So, Michael, I don't want to interrupt Amy here, but can I just insert something here because you're talking about the gifts of the different cultures, and I just want to share something. I know you asked us about joys, but I want to talk about the ways in which I think other cultures also help us to deal with some of the painful things in life. I think that, well, I'll speak very personally. So for 3 or 4 years when I was in high school and early college, I was dealing with just such deep existential doubt about my Christian faith. I mean, painful. And I found that the typical songs that the white community sang they just seemed mockery to me. I could not deal with them. And I found that the spirituals of the African American community, a community that has so deeply borne pain and knows how to lament, they were the only things that really kept me sane during that time. And I can't describe it intellectually how the gift of that music ultimately led me to a place where I could embrace my faith again in a much more deep and complicated way. But I just know that it's not just the ways the different cultures help us with joys, it's the way that the lessons of different cultures enable us to bear pain in different ways. And so I just had to share that because that was such an important part of that 3 or 4 years of my journey. And I don't think I would be here today in the Christian community if I had not known if I'd not had the gift of that. And I mention this because one of the sections in here is about, well, no, it's actually in the early section about doubt. I think that often Christians don't know how to bear pain with each other because we feel like we have to be happy all the time. And so I feel like that one of the gifts of the African American community in particular is the gift of knowing how to lament and to bear pain in ways that end up allowing the whole community to move forward. And so I just want to express that it's not just the gifts, but it's also the ways that we learn how to bear pain. So I hope that's consistent with your notion of how we can enlarge each other within the context of the intercultural and cross-cultural situation.
No, I'm glad you shared that. And I do think it's really important to say, and that's part of why we phrased it in terms of enjoying each one's gifts, bearing each one's burdens. So there have been a couple times this semester, because we've tried to focus on issues which disproportionately impact people of color in chapel. And there have been times when people have pushed back and said, why, I mean, I just want to go back to kind of preaching the gospel. I don't want to, and part of the reality that we're talking about is if we want to sort of have access to the gifts of different traditions, it's really important to understand then to say, I'll go with you as you bear the burdens that are unique to being you.
Yes.
And that I'm with you as you go through this, and that we as Houghton want to more holistically care about the things that impact a lot of people, because we also want to enjoy all the gifts that all these folks bring to the table. And so it's very important to kind of hold those things in tension at all times. And I am glad about how it turned out in the covenant anyway, even though I know we still have a ways to go. In terms of, at least as I could say from looking at my email box, I know that there are people who still don't understand the bearing each other's burdens part as being particularly important. But that's what we're aiming at, and we'll keep aspiring. We are just about out of time for this section, but I do want to just briefly raise the last question. And if you have anything you want to say, no pressure to say anything, but we really in this section on sexuality there particularly focus on saying singleness has a place of honor. And that's a challenging thing in any Christian community full of young people who are thinking about getting married, because there is this definite like ring by spring feeling that has historically permeated Christian colleges that we try to work against, and to not say, hey, come, meet your mate at a Christian college. Like, that's not the point of being here. But I'm wondering how that looks to you. Like, do you feel practically like we really honor singleness in a particular way? Is there something we should do more to honor singleness? So anything particularly that you want to say on that, students? And again, no pressure if not, but make sure you have a chance to talk about it if you do.
I think that as someone who has been single during my entire experience here, I feel very safe in that. I've never felt a certain pressure to be more than that. I've watched my close friends partake in that, and they've met maybe like their boyfriend, girlfriend here, or they had one at home, and now their relationship is still growing as they're here. And I think that's great for them. I don't think they've ever felt pressured either, but I think that in me just going through my experience here alone, I've never felt like isolated because of that or anything like that. So I think that Houghton does a good job in and of itself of making me feel like it's okay to be like that, and that there's not a certain pressure or expectation for me, to live up to something more. If there is any kind of pressure, it would probably I think that must be something that happens in smaller circles, likely. Like if all your friends have like a boyfriend and girlfriend, it's like, okay, well, I really should. But personally, I've felt very safe.
Thanks, Molly. Anything, Ryan or Amy, that you want to say on that particularly? No pressure, but.
I kind of had a question on what is meant by honoring singleness. Like, I don't know if that meant promoting singleness, or like you prefer for students to stay single, or just try to gear them away from focusing mainly on marriage. So I kind of just wanted a little clarification on that.
Yeah, well, I think for me, and President Mullen, if you want to weigh in on this at all, but the idea being young people feel such intense pressure to get married, which is, I mean, marriage is a normal part of life for many people, and a good thing, a gift for many people to enjoy. But sometimes among Christians, marriage gets held up as you're not really fully grown up until you're married. And we want Houghton to be a place where if a student meets someone that they want to get married to at Houghton, that's wonderful, but it's not like you haven't fully grown up if you're not married. You might discover who you are as a single person and understand yourself. You might even understand yourself to be called to singleness for a long period of time after being at Houghton. And you see what your life is like with many friends that you can pour your life into Sometimes at Christian colleges or in certain churches, feels like that person gets kind of pitied instead of honored. And so that's the goal anyway. It's, again, very hard because I think young people in general are thinking about getting married, and so it's hard for them to make that shift. But
Michael, very briefly, the only thing I would add here, I love Amy's question.
yeah.
I would just say, having worked with college students for 35 years, I often have noticed women students in particular, where they feel like, well, I'm not sure I should really cultivate those gifts because it might make people think that I don't want to be married. And I do think that particularly for women students, what we're trying to say is, no, we want to be a place where both men and women can feel like God can use your gifts, and that women shouldn't be somehow making themselves smaller and worried that if they cultivate their gifts, then somehow someone's going to think they don't want to be married. So that was one of the other things that was in here that I think is really important. So I'm so glad Amy asked that question, because I'm sure students don't run around thinking, oh, I want to make singleness a place of honor. So I think you were able to explain that, Michael, very well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, with this, we'll wrap up today, and we have one more of these episodes to come. And so we'll look forward to joining you then when we have a chance to talk with you. So we'll see you soon.